Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Carl.
And you're listening to Secret Sonics. Honest conversations chock full of tactical advice to help you build your dream career in music and audio.
Whether it's skill development, mixing mindsets, personal branding, or work-life balance, we talk about ways to help set yourself up for success in the ever-changing music industry.
Let's get started.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am good, too.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you, too. I'm glad to be here. I know we initially started this podcast renewal kind of thing, trying to get a bunch of episodes kind of, in the bank so we could have a backlog for when you had your newest youngling added to your family. And life's been kind of crazy. We fell a little bit behind. Luckily, we had a couple buffer episodes ready to go, but I like
just enough.
But there's something that I like about today, how we really got to get a good episode out of this. And I like I like the pressure, and I think we have hit a flow together that I think we're gonna nail it.
I'm feeling good about it.
Yeah. I want to set the expectations real high for the listener.
I was just listening to a podcast episode. It's like a bass podcast. It's like Scott's bass lessons. And he was saying how he just can't get into Bruce, what's his name from Cream?
Jack Bruce.
The bass player.
Jack
Bruce. That's right. Jack Bruce. And I'm as a bass player, I'm embarrassed about this. But Scott was saying, everyone is just so into it, and then they hype it up, and then I'm like, this is good, but it's not the best thing ever. So yeah. Hopefully that is not what happens when people listen to this episode.
Yes, I hope that. So what you're saying, you hope that we're better than Cream?
I hope that we're better than Cream to Scott Devine, bass player. Or better than Jack Bruce as a bass player to him, in his opinion of Jack Bruce.
That is a very odd metric to measure ourselves against. Yeah.
Yes, that's the metric.
That's the metric. Is it imperial or metric?
I don't know.
It's British, right?
Yeah, they're British. They might have been using imperial back then. I don't know. I think everyone uses metric now except for America. But I think the Brits still use miles and feet and stuff.
But Canadians do. They're kind of half and half.
This is something that requires a Wikipedia search from me. So,
which we're not going to do. We're just going to keep going.
Jack Bruce is a good segue for our topic, I think. Yeah, in a weird way, in a weird sense.
Yeah,
perhaps
in a weird sense, because I forget what the topic is already, and we just talked about it 3 minutes ago. So tell me how Jack Bruce transitions into the topic.
Well, Jack Bruce played on stage, but then he also recorded in the studio. And I think we were going to talk about ways that, because we're both coming from performance backgrounds, you're a drummer, I'm a bass player. So we've made a transition from the stage to the studio. And maybe we thought about talking about how that's informed our studio life, how the stage has informed our work in the studio. So yeah, is that a cool topic?
I think this is really, really important because I know we are not the only ones that have started on one side of the glass and ended up on the other side, right? So there's a pretty big core belief that I have about music, and it's that a lot of what we experience in our own little weird corner of the industry, a lot of what we learn and what we've experienced can be applied to other parts of the industry as well, and to other roles in the industry, other aspects of it. I realized that pretty early on because I started playing piano when I was really young, and then when I was in, I think, 3rd grade or 4th grade, I started playing clarinet, and I didn't have to relearn how to read treble clef because I already learned that. I already knew what a quarter note was. I already knew what a quarter rest was. I wasn't virtuosic in 3rd grade, but I at least had a foundational knowledge from another instrument that I was still able to apply to the new instrument. And that continued when I went on to learning other instruments, and then even going from, harmonic and melodic instruments into playing drums. There's still so much that I could take with me when I go from one to the other. And a lot of the technical application is really where the differences are, but a lot of the core foundational conceptual stuff that applies everywhere. And I'd like to talk today about like what are the core conceptual foundational things about being a live touring musician? What are the things that we can take from those experiences that we've also applied other side of the glass in the studio? So do you have any, Ben, that I know you do. I guess the question is more like what's the first one that jumps out to you?
Okay, the first one that definitely jumps out to me is checking my ego and serving the song. Because as a bass player, you're there as like a supportive role, and you're just trying to elevate the song as much as you can with your bass playing. And there's a time and place to to do fancy things and to do tricks on stage, but usually you're holding it down, right? At least for me as a bass player. And so I've learned through years of playing on stage that the better you could just hold it down and support the song, the more happy everyone's going to be with you. If you're like slapping and doing all kinds of fills the entire thing, it gets annoying, right? People get annoyed. When I learned to just kind of sort of hold it down all the time, and for the most part, maybe every once in a while you do a lick just to have fun, but for the most part, you're just kind of holding it down. People are just always so much happier with you as a bass player, and keeping that ego in check and just serving the song is really what it's all about. And the same thing applies, in the studio. When you're working with an artist and just trying to get their song to be their vision, to serve them, to choose parts that serve the song and aren't just to do something cool because you can. And same in mixing, just because you can do a crazy vocal throw doesn't mean it's always appropriate. So just kind of serving the song and making sure that everything suits what the artist's vision is sort of keeping that ego in check and keeping your eye on the prize, which is helping the artist make a song that they're proud of and fits their vision. So yeah, that would be my first takeaway. How about you, Carl?
I'm going to acknowledge that we are going to be opposites today because normally you are the person with the very practical examples, and I'm the one that's like super existential and unnecessarily heady. But I'm going to say something very, very practical. And I'm going to say it's the importance of tempo and how even small shifts in tempo can make or break the energy and the emotion of a song. And obviously, I'm a drummer. That was my background. So I'm going to be more, highly attuned to tempo shifts and variations and things more than most people. And weirdly enough, I think I didn't really get a deeper understanding of how important tempo really, really is until I had more experience in the studio as a session drummer and playing on tracks with a click and then starting to use a click live. That was when I started to become much more conscious of when things shift, much more conscious of how my emotional state affects how fast I play, even. Like knowing that if I'm really anxious and amped up, I'm gonna play faster than I normally would because the adrenaline's going and it doesn't feel faster to me in the moment, but listening back, it definitely is. And when I would play a song with a click track that is like 124 every time, there will be some nights that I'd play that same song and it feels like it's going so slow, and other nights where I feel like it's going so fast. And it's not changing speed; it's just my perception of it.
Yeah.
And so I know this isn't something that I necessarily learned from live and then applied it to the studio. It was something that I learned in the studio, applied it live, which then really deepened my understanding of it. And that's what I was able to apply back in the studio and understand it in the studio a lot more, and being way more conscious of how things fit into a groove, like tempo wise and timing wise, but also how important it is to experiment with tempos, because sometimes just 1 BPM change can completely elevate or destroy the vibe of a song.
Yeah. Oh, and we talked about this, I think, in the theory episode of just like experimenting with that stuff and going up, going down a little bit, like just until it feels totally right. And you know what? I guess you could come back the next day in a different mood and feel differently. But yeah, those like slight little changes make such a big difference. I'm so with you on that.
So we talked about, the checking your ego at the door. We talked about the effect that tempo has on the energy of the song and the way that the emotion is effectively or ineffectively communicated to the audience. But what about the interpersonal aspects of being on, not just being on stage with a band or with a group of musicians, but being inside of part of a team? Like
Yeah.
how has your team member skills affected
Yeah.
how you are in the studio?
Oh, dude, so much. So much. Again, also checking the ego thing, that applies there as well. I think being a people person, know how to work in a group setting and get along with people, even if you disagree, and figuring out how to sort out disagreements, whether it's musical or business or whatever it might be.
Or
When you're
personal? Yeah.
yeah, personal. Man, I've learned so many lessons, and I think everyone makes mistakes also, with especially when you're working with friends in a band. Like, you make mistakes and apologize, and or they apologize to you and move on and bury hatchets and stuff, and there's the greater good of like moving past these issues. And working in a band, we had fights and stuff, or different members would be upset with other members and not necessarily you, and talking and trying to work it out. Yeah, that's huge. And I think maybe it goes back to my first thing of like dropping the ego thing, is like, how do you serve this project as a band? Serve it best. And as long as it's right for you, you have to serve the you have to look at the big picture of what's going to be best for this group playing live, and not necessarily what's just great for you. And if it's not great for you, then maybe it's not the right band. Same way as if this music is not right for you, maybe you shouldn't be working on it in the role of a mixer or producer. Yeah, I don't know if like how much deeper I should go into this,
What
but
about
yeah,
like
like
the
yeah,
conflict resolution?
yeah. I think when you're in a band, you learn how to say things in a way that another person won't be offended, but will still hopefully push the needle that you're trying to push. If you think this is not the right kind of music for the band to be playing, there's a way to say something that won't hurt somebody's feelings, but will still come across at, you can come across as kind and still get your agenda across, because people's egos, especially when they're young in a band, are probably a lot more fragile. I've learned how to not hurt people's feelings, or not to, or how maybe my feelings would not have been hurt if it had been done in a different way. And when you're working with an artist in the studio, like, you have no business offending them, right? Because they're hiring you and you're there to support them in this very sensitive time in their life. And so you can have an agenda to help them sound better if you think what you're doing is right. And hopefully it is, because they've hired you. But you have to give that stuff across in a way that's so kind, and that they know that you have their back, and
Yeah.
that, you're not abandoning them. You're just giving them a little bit of criticism, or you're just giving them something constructive to think about. So does that make sense? Is that something that
Yeah.
you've had to do?
And to clarify, you're talking about, like, when you say agenda, you don't mean like anything's like a sinister ulterior motive. You just mean like the literal sense, not in the negative connotation sense. It's just like, oh no,
Yeah.
like you have a goal you're trying to achieve, whether it's a specific thing you're trying to achieve that day, or just like the goal of the vision of the song itself.
Yeah. Like in the context of a wedding band, it would be like, we should be playing more like pop songs to attract higher quality weddings, instead of playing like this old 60s song or something.
Yeah.
Just for example. And in the studio, it could be like, I want this person to sing in a different, kind of way, like maybe brighter or breathier or something. And I don't want them to be offended that I didn't like the way they sounded when they were singing on the mic. I'm just throwing out a couple examples that are just coming top of my mind, but it could be numerous other kinds of things.
Yeah. What's coming to mind for me was that I really loved figuring out set lists. Like, I was really into determining like what the order of the songs would be, like how to kind of shape the energy and the flow of the set. And that ended up becoming something that a lot of the bands I was in, whether I was like in the band or it was like a hired gun, like mercenary kind of situation, people would get me to come up with the set lists. And sometimes I had to communicate the reasoning behind my choices to members of the band or to other people in the project. That actually kind of reminds me of one embarrassing story that is it's a bit of a tangent, but I just remember, I still feel terrible about it. Not terrible, I feel embarrassed, I guess, is maybe a better way to say it. But I was playing a gig with a singer-songwriter. I think we had like a 4 or 5 piece band for that show. and I was usually the one in that project in charge of calling out the set list. And for whatever reason that day, we were playing in like an art gallery or something, and we didn't have a set list like figured out beforehand. And the lead singer was like, "Carl, just call out songs." So going through it, I'm just like going through, and I'm kind of acting like a DJ in a sense, where I'm trying to get the vibe of the room, trying to get the vibe of the musicians, trying to like see what I think is going to be the next, the right next song to play. And we're maybe like, I don't know, 40 minutes into the set, and I call out a song, and I start counting it in, and we start playing it, and about 3 measures in, the lead singer starts laughing and stops, and we all kind of stop, and he's like, "Did we play that before?" And I realized that like 2 songs ago, I already called it, like we just played that song like 8 minutes.
It was just
prior.
your favorite song. It was like
it was just my favorite song, and I felt it could have been great for that moment. However, it was also great for a moment that happened 2 songs ago.
It just, your memory failed you.
My memory failed me, and I don't know if anybody else will ever remember that, but I won't let myself live it down. But that was one of those things that I had to learn how to communicate that, and had to try to communicate to them why I felt the way that I did about a certain order of songs, because you have different people in a project have their own different reasonings for what the order should be. Maybe they want to play their favorite song first, or they want to play their favorite song last. Here's an example. Maybe one person wants to play song A and B back to back because of the fact that they have all the same guitar pedal settings, coincidentally, for those 2 songs. But the keyboard player has to like switch from organ to playing guitar for that song, and needs time to switch over, and then has to switch back to organ again in the next song after it. So it's like trying to figure out, okay, well, I understand why this is a convenient choice and makes sense for person A, but it makes it super inconvenient for person B. How do we find a happy medium of like, okay, this makes the most sense for the song, makes the most sense for the set. Yeah, this would be more convenient for you if we did these 2 songs back to back, but here are the reasons why we should split them up because of X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so like in the context of the studio, it's just about explaining why you're going about doing different things in a way that people won't be offended, and they'll understand what the intent is.
Yeah, like why I know we talked about like how to sound like a high school band a couple weeks ago,
Right.
but it's that classic thing of like, the drummer plays a fill going into the chorus, and the guitarist plays a little lick going into the chorus, and the bass player plays a little lick going into the chorus, and the vocalist is doing a pickup into the chorus. And as a producer, you have to kind of explain to them and say, hey, no, don't do all of those things at once. If you do all of those, then nothing gets to have a moment, and it's just kind of discombobulating for the listener. So having to have that kind of a conversation, it's like, okay, I know you like that riff that you play there. I know you like that drum fill, but vocals are top priority in this. Or like if for whatever reason it's like a weird guitar virtuoso's solo project, and they're the focus and the singer is just an afterthought. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't work on that project, but I'm sure those projects existed back in like the 80s and 90s.
They definitely exist. I don't work on, I haven't worked on anything like that yet.
But like, so there are going to be exceptions like that. But generally speaking, at least for the stuff that I work on, like vocals are number one, and everything else needs to get out of the way. And trying to be able to explain that to a band when maybe the guitarist is the one that wrote the song. I'm trying to say, okay, I know you wrote the song, but your guitar lick here, like we got to save that for a different moment because that's getting in the way. And trying to have those kind of conversations where it's like, it's not just a logistical issue of, oh, these songs should be played back to back on stage because of XYZ, technical or instrumental reason. It's like, hey, your creative idea is great in a vacuum, but in the context of everything else, it doesn't help the song. It kind of gets in the way. And trying to have those conversations in a way that is very delicate and can really change the emotional vibe in the room. And not just in that moment, but for the whole project. Like, it's not fun if you don't handle those conversations delicately. So
Yeah.
being a session player for so long, being a hired gun for so long, and also kind of being
Mm.
in a lot of the projects I was in, I was kind of like band dad. I was kind of like the one that people looked to for this kind of direction.
Right.
That was really great practice for when I made the transition into the studio, because I had a lot of difficult conversations, like a lot, and I have a lot of practice being able to explain with grace
With
why
grace.
why
Love it.
somebody's idea
Yeah.
is not for the greater good when they
Yeah.
genuinely believe that it is.
Yeah. Man, that is so real. And I feel like so much of what we do is trying to explain things with a lot of grace and give people our years of wisdom that we have under our belt from also the studio and also the stage, and be like, we've been around the bend a few times. Let me help you out here, because we just know, because we've done it more. And then it's all about the delivery, right? Hey everyone, friend of the podcast and Grammy-nominated engineer/mixer Travis Ferentz hosts Progressions, Success in the Music Industry.
It's a podcast exploring creativity, productivity, and growth in music. Travis has set out to document his own journey and bring those valuable lessons to you to apply to your own career.
Join in each week for conversations with some of the industry's best and brightest about the mindsets and strategies that they use in their careers every day.
Whether you're feeling stuck, digging for inspiration, or just looking for a mix tip, Progressions is probably for you.
Go check it out wherever you get your podcasts, or click the link in the show notes. So another thing that I was thinking about that happens in a band or on stage is just like live arrangements. This is what you were talking about, maybe giving over as advice, but just learning what arrangement works on stage is really informative also in the studio when it comes to producing, especially, and also mixing, maybe muting some of those fills that are not needed. And just knowing what serves the song, and like how arrangements are built and transitions and all that stuff is such a, I carry all of that with me into the studio, of just knowing how groove will fit together, how to build momentum, just even being a live bass player and, knowing how to build momentum with the bass informs how I'm building momentum in a song, so all that stuff, that arrangement thing is such a big part of what I still do today in the studio. Is that something that's a big one for you as well?
Yeah. And I think an example that I'm thinking of is when this is actually maybe using your studio experience to inform the live arrangement, or at least you having your studio experience help you to be aware of what works live versus what won't work in the studio. And I think maybe a good example would be long intros, long outros, vamping bridge sections. Like when you're on stage, it is a multi-sensory experience for the audience, right? There's the sound, there's the visuals, there's the smell of, booze and BO, whatever it is.
There's that human experience.
There's a human experience.
Being live in the room.
I call it booze and BO. You call it the human experience. I feel like you were a little bit more eloquent than I was, but it's like a multi-sensory experience. And, long intros can be used to build anticipation. It can be used as a way for someone to do introductions over it, to tell a story over it. There are all these things that you can do. But when you get in the studio, you have to have the ability to tell the band, I know this works live. This is not live. There are the things that enable this to work live, the things that enable this intro to be a minute and a half long live. That context that is being created on stage when you're performing it, like the visuals of the singer going back and forth, the emphatic movements of the drummer, all of those things, they can't see that when they're listening to your song on Spotify. So it's like, how do we recognize the things that are adding to the live performance that would actually take away from the studio performance?
Yeah, that's great. And not all artists need to play the studio version, right? There are those that do, but then there's those that don't. I'm thinking about jam bands and all kinds of funk bands and stuff like that, where The live experience is meant to be a different sort of experience. The record is supposed to be like, this is the archetypical version of the song or whatever. And then the live experience is like, how are we feeling tonight? You know, maybe we can play it a little bit faster, right? Like you were talking about like tempo and stuff and mood and like, or maybe we can add an extra, like maybe we can build up with this intro, or maybe we could just like jam out because we're having fun, you know? So
Yeah. And that's
it's
something that I have
legit.
to remind. Yeah, I have to remind artists that a lot of times where I'll tell them like, just because you do it this way live doesn't mean you should do it this way in the studio. But the same goes both ways. Just because you do it this way in the studio doesn't mean that you have to do it that way live. Like save that cool idea for the live show. Save that
Yeah.
cool idea for the acoustic version. You can make it a special experience for people that know the song, come see you live, and it is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a practical example of kind of walking that fine line between having the goal or like the agenda in the non-negative way, and of trying not to upset somebody about their creative idea that they have. A practical example is how I will always try to frame those arrangement changes. Those usually it's like kind of trimming the fat from a live version of us or the song that they've been like practicing and like performing it that way. I will try to say like, hey, like save this for the live show. Like it's okay for them to be different. Because a lot of times people just they think in a very black and white way that if we change it for the studio, therefore it has to change live. And I think jazz artists know that, jam bands know that, like any kind of like improvisational musicians, like they know that that's just part of what they do. That's expected in what they do. But when you get more into the rock and especially in pop, that's not something that they have a lot of experience with generally. But I do like I cut my teeth doing a lot of like avant-garde jazz. So like a lot of improv. So that's one of those things that in a way, all of the improv experience that I have helps my conversations with pop artists, which I never really
Mm.
thought would be a thing. Like my experience doing those things live makes me aware of what can work live versus in the studio, what can not work live versus in the studio. And it enables me to, use that experience, but also my experience in the pop realm and translate not just the goals, but also the remedies and the other uses for those ideas.
Very cool. I like that a lot. So the last thing I would just say about like being a live musician was learning how to learn songs and learn them quickly and effectively and efficiently and remembering, changes and chord progressions and parts. And I just think that cutting my teeth doing so many shows and learning so many songs and playing them night after night, you just learn how to learn music. And so when an artist walks in with a song, I'm just ready to go. Like, okay, cool. Yeah. And I'll remember the chord progression and I'll think about ways we can change the chord progression really quickly. And I'll remember my part when I'm recording it, right? I'll remember what I wanted to do in each section with the bass. And like, I don't have to do too many passes. And I'm able to record very efficiently because I've learned how to learn the music because I've done this so long, for so many years. I've learned how to learn music, and I've put in those hours listening to the records, going over all the parts, memorizing it. And so just all those years and reps of doing the learning of music enables me to learn music really quickly and to execute it very efficiently. I think that's like maybe even the biggest thing that I've learned from playing live is just learning how to play music. Yeah, and there's nothing like that. Learning how to play for a gig, or like if you get a new gig and then all of a sudden you have to learn a bunch of songs and then you like go to the shed and you just work, like that just gives you so much material, and like it's just so much to learn from, and that will give you tools in the studio like nothing else, I think.
I want to respond to that before I tee up the next episode, because that actually makes me think of something too. We're talking about the ridiculous quantity of songs that we've learned over the years. And I think one of the things that made me appreciate is that many, many, many songs can have the same chord progression. Many, many, many songs can have the same basic drum groove, but yet we become aware of all of the nuances that make each song different. So when we go into the studio and we're working on a song that happens to be 6-4-5-1, whatever, we know like we don't shut down and think, oh, I've heard that progression before, I can't do anything with that. We realize, oh no, there are infinite things that we can do even with a simple chord progression, even with a simple, Billie Jean drum beat. And it makes us explore the different options of how we can add nuance and slight variations to these things to be able to make it unique.
Yeah, I love that. And I would say I would go even further now of just like learning all these songs and knowing all these songs because you've learned how to play them just builds up that discography in your head, which is something that you're always going to as a producer and mixer of like, we talked about reference mixes, but there's just all this musical references available at an arm's length inside the library of our brains.
Wait, you keep your brain an arm's length away from you?
Yep.
That explains so much, Ben.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you, audience, for bearing with me on this roller coaster ride of understanding how my brain works,
and also its location.
And it's really meta because it's in my brain, but it's also an arm's length away. Amazing.
It's a big brain.
It's
all Benny big brains over here.
It's the Neanderthal brain. So take us home. Take us home into the next episode.
I'm going to take you home. I would like to actually make the next week's episode that we are going to record in approximately 2 minutes, but you are going to hear in approximately 7 days. I want to talk about specifically how our background instruments affect the way that we produce. Like me being a drummer and how that affects the way that I produce. You being a bassist, how that affects the way that you produce. And maybe how we approach the problem solving and decision making from different perspectives.
Great. Let's do it. Well, for the audience, I guess we'll see you later.
Yeah.
But for Carl, we'll hang out.
Yeah. We'll keep on going. If you want to, you can just close your eyes and imagine us talking about it.
You can make a bet with your friend about what our answers might be.
Yeah, go on fanduel.com. On that note, listeners, you're wonderful. We love you. We'll see you next week. And Ben, even though I'm going to see you in approximately, 3 seconds. Bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. If anything here resonated with you, please share this or your favorite episode with a friend.
And as always, we love to hear from our listeners. So find us on social media at Secret Sonics,
at Ben Wallach Music,
and at Carl Bonner. Until next time, bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl. That was good. I think the outro was great.